Hello, hello, welcome to a fresh episode of Mocca with Moiz. In today's episode, we will talk to Faraz Maqsood Hamidi, who is an admin by day, a poet at night. He is the co-founder of the Dimity Partnership, which is one of Pakistan's leading advertisement and brand consultancy firms. They work on brand identity, on brand integrity. They have offices in Pakistan, Dubai, and London. He's also on the board of various education institutions. He teaches at the Indus Valley School of Art and Architecture. We talk about branding, design, acting, and lots more. Faraz, how are you?
I'm good. And I was about to say that after that introduction, even I want to hear what I have to say.
So, before we begin and, delve deep into the discussion, there's one thing that I like to ask all my guests. Tell us about yourself, where you grew up, because I think what you do later in life is shaped so much by what you do and where you grew up.
Okay. So there's a word for people like me, and I recently discovered it. It's called third culture kids.
Okay.
Yeah, third culture kids. So that basically means that we can call home anywhere that we can hang our hats. So my father was a career banker. So I was born here, but then he sort of got transferred every 2 years to different parts of the world. So we were sort of career tourists, so to speak. And the magic of that, of course, we didn't know as kids that we just thought that this is what normal life is, because you do abandon the friends you made, you abandon the home you've lived in, the neighborhood that you wanted to call your own, the foods that you loved. All of these were just 2-year gifts for 22 years. Now, what kind of creature comes out of this amalgamation is sitting in front of you, but this is sort of what my past has been. So we lived, I think we lived in Africa, Kenya, Sudan, Egypt, some Gulf states. I'm trying to remember Bahrain, Oman, the Emirates in Abu Dhabi, as far afield as Hong Kong, and then independently, when I was studying in a Swiss boarding school in London called Tassus. Because I think my father pushed me off over there because there weren't any schools in Oman at the time. And then Paris, and then Boston. So I don't know. I don't know what my background is. I mean, I'm a green passport holder, but in terms of figuring out, what are you? It's very hard. It's very hard to pin that. You're a global citizen, although that sounds a bit cliched and pretentious, but it's all this. But I have been here for 30 years, so I think that's something to say.
And the one question people like you often have is that when you came back to Pakistan, you've been here for the last 30 years now, but when you came back to Pakistan, was there a degree of displacement? Because I have friends who've lived in different parts of the world, and when they come back to Pakistan, they feel that their friends have moved on, life has moved on. So was there a degree of displacement when you came back?
No, not displacement at all. And I think it's because when you've consistently been displaced, although that's the wrong word, you've consistently been gifted with new experiences and opportunities. Then when you get gifted again with something that you traditionally have always heard of, called your own, and were born into the Urdu culture and language, and to hear it and feel it all around you, there is great pride in that. There is enormous pride in that. And you feel a sense of comfort, not displacement at all. My Urdu sucked. It's better now. But because we always spoke it at home, my pronunciation was sort of decent. And if I were speaking in Urdu to someone, they could never tell that I'm illiterate because I can't still read, although I've survived a career without having, to read it. But no sense of displacement at all. It's a gift. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. Everything that I am, everything that we are is because of this country. Wherever we are, is because of this country. So how can we possibly malign it?
Yeah. Okay, now, the one thing that's also very interesting is that we were having this conversation on the phone a couple of months back.
Right.
When you first
the amount of time it took you to get me here.
Yeah. Right. And you said that, I don't just do ads. And the traditional notion of an ad agency or a creative agency was that they would help you do ads. But you do so much more. You do brand consultancy. You work on brand integrity. If you could just walk us through your work, like what do you do? And now, for a creative agency like yours to move out of Pakistan as well, Pakistanis aren't really known to be very creative. We're known as perhaps good doctors, engineers.
Sure.
But for an agency like yours to move out of Pakistan, so that's also a big achievement.
It is. It is a big achievement. And I think it's, I think it's less of an achievement now because because of COVID, because of the digital sharing economy, all of us are really, really hyper interconnected, and we can all work remotely. And I think people have understood that it's okay to trust someone that you've never met in person before. That's a paradigm shift in the world, and I think because of that, it's easier to sort of move around virtually or even physically. I think it's a good thing because it's the doctor and the engineer that seems to export himself. I'm privileged in the sense that I'm exporting my brand of creativity after having invested 30 years in my own country. So I am, taking Pakistan with me, as opposed to doing anything that's slightly colonizing sounding. So that's one thing. In terms of what I do, well, branding is a fascinating field, and especially for me as someone who didn't growing up in the 80s, everyone was heading into business. Everyone was going for the MBA, and I certainly knew that I wasn't cut out to be a banker like my father. Certainly not anything more traditional. And I went through a plethora. I mean, that's why you see so many schools on my CV, right? I mean, I went through a plethora of institutions trying to figure out where I need to end up. Fortunately, advertising sort of called me into its folds, and I figured out that I'm a creative person. I didn't even know that term existed. And that's sort of what I've been following through every day with the work that I do. So what we do is branding, and branding is to borrow B.F. Skinner's. He was from your alma mater, a Harvard psychologist. So he sort of said something about education, that education is what's left once everything you've learned is forgotten. So branding is what's left once everything you've communicated is forgotten, right? And of course, there are so many channels to that communication. One part might be visual, one part might be verbal. A lot of it has to do with the visual vocabulary of what you have to say. But in essence, every object, service, product, person has a pulsating DNA. And our job as creative people, the writers, the artists, the poets, the consultants, the psychologists, all of us, even some of us in one person, come together to help get that object or service to confess to its strengths. And then we build the packaging of that strength into something tangible. And then we take that tangibility across touch points so that people feel something deep and honest and authentic towards it. And then we keep building on it as it comes through, as it grows up in the world. So that's what we do. Our journey begins with the brand's journey.
And you spoke about branding. Now, I was listening to the speech by Shashi Tharoor, who's an Indian politician, also worked at the UN for a while. And he said something very interesting. And he said that the strongest nations in this day and age are not the ones with the strongest armies, but are ones with the greatest soft power. And you work a lot with the government as well. Do you think Pakistan also as a country has a branding problem? And do you think that there's a lot of scope for governments to also work on that? And where do you think companies like yours, come into the equation when you try to build brand Pakistan?
Yeah. So there are a few forms of power. Hard power is, coercion and payment. Do this or we'll shoot you, or here's some money. Now do what we're saying. Soft power is what we do through attraction and persuasion. We speak about the soft image of the country. It's a terrible term. Yeah. It's a terrible term because it's the image of the country. And the image of the country might be governed by outside parties for the time being because they've got the control on the narrative. And that's also because Pakistan hasn't invested in its own story. But I was recently honored by having done the Brand Pakistan project for the government of Pakistan. So we worked with the PM and we worked with his advisors to create a look and feel for Pakistan. So very soon, if it's launched, we will have our own version of, Malaysia, Truly Asia, or Amazing Thailand, or Incredible India, or what have you. But we have a brand. It's about to be launched, but we have it, and it's super sexy, very contemporary. It's positioning Pakistan as sort of a hemispheric hub in this region that, if it gets its act right, which will always be a work in progress, can be a real player in the years and decades to come.
And you spoke about, not being interested in business. You knew that you didn't want to be a banker. But I think even in your kind of work, there's need to reconcile your creative instinct with business considerations. Because if I'm a brand, I mean, yes, I want an ad that looks great, that looks sexy, but I also want to sell my product at the end of the day. So as a creative person, how difficult is it for you to reconcile these two seemingly inconsistent, pulls? Because in one direction you pull towards your creative instinct, but then there's also brands who, and there's this concern about Pakistani ads being extremely regressive, right? So for example, there have been ads where, there's a woman who's cooking and then her in-laws are seeing a khana acha banaya hai, bura banaya hai. She's being judged on the basis of how well she cooks. So how difficult is it for you to, sometimes make ads like those and understand that, every now and then you have to compromise on your creative instincts?
So to answer the latter part first, thank God for cliche. Thank God for cliche, because if it weren't for cliche, those of us who want to be inventive wouldn't know where to start from. Cliche has always been there for eons. And sometimes, if we want to be kind, occasionally, sometimes we need to understand that people are reassured by what is old and by what is familiar. People want to be told the same old stories again. It's almost like the child who's saying, read me the same bedtime story, mom or dad. So there is that sort of stream of consciousness, so to speak, in repeating something that is, to a professional, it might be regressive and conservative and kind of dumb, right? But to the mass of men and women, it's just something that's out there and they get it. And it's, if anything, it's sort of a reminder of what's out there. But obviously, cutting edge creative doesn't happen that way. Cutting edge creative means mining for something unique, a signature insight that no one's really been able to find before. And if they have found it, then they haven't been able to express it as well as you intend to do so now. So locating that, I think, is the first thing. You also mentioned creative almost as if it were potentially a cosmetic thing. So I look at design as the idea. Design is not cosmetics. Design is the idea first. And once you're able to locate the idea, then all the other elements that go into moving that idea forward or bringing it to life comes into play. And design is just one of those things. I mean, there's consultancy, there's strategy, there's production. There are single-minded thoughts that need to be pulled out. There are brand essences. There are one-word equities on which you can hang the entire brand experience. There's a lot of mumbo jumbo, but fundamentally what it is pull that insight, package it beautifully, and send it out into the world the way you would want your children to go out into the world, beautifully groomed and well-spoken.
Yeah. And now we spoke initially about how you're also a poet, and I know that you've done some poetry in French as well.
Yeah.
But you also come from a family of writers and poets. Your uncle's Faraz Maqsood, your aunt Zara Nigar.
Yeah.
And in some sense, your work, while it's in some sense quite similar because you're also in the creative realm, but it's also very different. Was this a conscious attempt to make a separate space in a family where you have people who are as accomplished, or was this just an expression of who you really are?
Oh God, I don't know how to answer that. Well, one thing I've realized, and I think it might be just one of those, silent persuaders that's sort of inside you, is that when you come from a group of people, now mind you, we're not sort of sitting around a fireplace, cracking jokes, right? We're related. Mm-hmm. And we're loving and kind to each other like any family. But there's obviously this sort of presence. There is always a presence of skill and talent that one is made aware of. And you've taken it for granted. You've taken it for granted. So when everybody is able to tell a good story, you need to tell a better story. You see, so I think a lot of us just got trained within the family to know how our voices could be heard over the others because their voices are pretty damn good, So I think a lot of that sort of was happening automatically, not because one wanted to become a creative. I think creativity finds you, or you realize that, oh, wait a minute, I'm a little out of the box on many fronts, and maybe this is the decision or the field that I sort of might want to enter. So there is that. So no, I don't think there's any creating of your own space, because fundamentally, when you're in search of beauty, then you are, I mean, beautiful architecture, beautiful buildings, beautiful words, all of that is part and parcel of the creative pursuit. Then you are also in search of truth. A truth is a very good filter for all things that are creative. Feeling is a very good filter for what is truthful. So when you are in that pursuit, then you need to find your own brand of honesty and authenticity. And you find it. You find it through trials and tribulations. You eventually get to finding your voice. We all are in search of that. I think the artist or the painters who might be watching you today need to find their own vision. Otherwise, they'll forever be copying Rothko or Picasso or whoever they're inspired by. The poet, the poets who might be watching you are imitating different voices. And the struggle is to find your voice. And it's hard. It's hard to locate what you are. And through trial and tribulation, you will. And it's a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
So, so I think you create your own space in terms of trying to find your own truth. Not because you're trying to ape or imitate or trying to fake it. That won't be authentic.
And now you've been in the creative realm for the past almost 30 years now, and you worked through different generations, right? Different times, different governments. And the one issue that I think creative people often come across in countries like Pakistan, in post-democratic, post-dictatorship states, are that you often have to face censorship. And you designed this campaign for PIA where you had a marker on the planes.
Yeah, you know about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Chief Justice at that time, and I was actually in court that day.
No.
Yeah. And then when he said, "Ki itne महंगे आपने marker क्यों लगाई हैं, इसको आप फौरन हटाएं." So how do you deal with things like that? Where you work on a project for months and maybe somebody like the Chief Justice, on a whim says that, no, this isn't right. Or somebody, an institution like the PEMRA, for instance, says that this ad can't go. So how does that feel?
So, censorship is creativity's best friend. When people say, hey, the canvas is all yours, I'm a little troubled because I don't want a big canvas. I want you to give me the tightest brief possible with as many constraints as you can, because then my sort of creative juices start flowing. Then I know what to do. So I think we need to understand that. So that's one thing. But yes, we do have a cast of clowns. We need to operate in the circus. And you will get this wherever you are. If it's not the Chief Justice, it might be your wife. It's going to be someone. And you sort of have to follow the idea of what is called blocking in American football. That while one person has the ball, your team players need to be knocking off the opponent so that you can somehow go and score. So we did score. We had a fantastic team at PIA. And this particular design was, I think, the only piece of graphic design ever to be debated in the Supreme Court of any country ever in the world, which was fascinating to me. But I think it was done in a large part out of a place of misunderstanding. What's the Chief Justice doing, wondering about the livery of a corporation when there are really better things to be worried about? I don't know where he is now, but I think it was a misfire and it's unfortunate. And of course, I remember even on TV that, there was sort of claiming that this brand agency sort of got billions out of this. And that's when I understood, wait a minute, news isn't really news.
Yeah.
It's deep fake or fake news because we haven't earned a penny out of this entire process, we should have.
Yeah.
It got approved. We were the lowest bidder. So all of that is there.
I was about to ask what he did with the billions. Yeah.
Well, what? I'm not out. I'm still here. So all of that is just part and parcel of what happens when mudslinging is occurring, and you just sort of got caught in the middle of it. But one of the great things about this business is that I can sleep comfortably at night because it's advertising, it's entertainment. I'm not feeding people. I'm not building bridges, which is far more important. I'm not doing surgery, and so on and so forth. No psychotherapy. It's advertising, and it's fun and it's lighthearted. So to sort of go crazy and bonkers over this is a bit ridiculous. Yeah. Let's figure out where we are, what we're doing, and enjoy what we're doing.
Yeah. And you're also teaching at Indus Valley currently. I think you're also on their board.
Yeah.
And I think the one question people often have is that, is Pakistan producing the kind of talent that in the creative space as well, in other spaces as well, but in this context, particularly in the creative space, that can compete with people throughout the world. So, and you've been teaching there for a while.
Yeah.
So, do you think there has been a tangible difference in the kind of students you had at that time and in the kind of education that, you've been imparting since then?
Yeah, look, the students over there, but then it's a specialized art
Yeah.
school, right? We sort of went to a liberal arts university, right? They're better than I could ever be, number one. So that's great. The second thing is that when you are a student and you graduate university, you've just been primed. You're not really educated. I mean, you have to enter the University of Life to be educated, right? And you need to work 10,000 hours. Who was that? Malcolm Gladwell?
Yeah.
Yep. So you have to work 10,000 hours, or at least 10 years, doing the same old thing, because you learn by doing. Otherwise, it's just like watching TV. Have you seen those masterclass things that are sort of going around? I mean, so initially they came out with these celebrity teachers, and I think celebrities are good at being celebrities, not teachers, by the way. That's a different field altogether. But you learn by doing. You can't learn by sort of absorbing.
Yeah.
So when you graduate and you have potential and you realize that you might like something, but you have to sort of be distinctive about recognizing, are you good at it too? I might love cricket, but am I good at it? If I'm good at it, then I should enter it. Otherwise, enjoy it, love it, but please stay away, because you're going to make the rest of us lose. So we've got some great talent, no doubt, but it's too early to tell whether it will amount to greatness. And greatness is, to quote Bill Shakespeare, greatness is something that you're either born with, or you grow into, or is thrust upon you. And you need to navigate your way in terms of finding out what brand of greatness you're going to occupy. We have our greats. Just before coming over here, I was in a panel discussion for Ada magazine, I don't know why I call it Ada, but ADA magazine, with the great, legendary Javed Jabbar and the super smart, super creative Ali Rez, we just had a blast. And what was ironic is that sort of technically three generations were represented. Javed Jabbar from the 70s and 80s, me, I would imagine 90s and the noughts, and actually Ali and I are the same generation, but Ali going forward, and then lots of other people, who will take on from what we've done. And every generation needs to rebel against what the previous generation did. Otherwise, how do you move on? So all these kids that are coming out will need to do the same. They need to find the cause that they want to rebel against. And hopefully it's going to be my cause. Everything that I've done must be rebelled against for it to move into a new dimension. The problem isn't the kids. The problem is the nature of digital media. That's sort of got us on the wrong side, I feel, of the fence today. The curse of juniorization, where, at the C-suite level, people like you and me, we can talk about all the nuances of design, but at the end of the day, we're going to give it to some 23-year-old who has a KPI of pushing out 200 digital posts per day. So that's going to, what's going to happen. Yeah. It's going to be crappy posts, ill-conceived, ill-groomed work that's going out. But his KPI is to put out 200 posts. So what kind of work do you think is going to come out? And then a lot of people have, because the bar for entry is so low in the digital space, everyone and their mother literally is on Facebook. And they're all sort of doing freelancing. And the freelancing is turning into something that is a soup of mediocrity. We need to be careful of that. Yeah. And I think smart people need to be alerted to the fact that if this is your vocation, you need to give it your due respect and due diligence.
And the last question before we go, you work with so many brands. You work with Zong, Ingro, PIA. If there's one brand throughout the world that you could choose that you haven't worked on, but which you think needs massive, rebranding, which brand would that be?
I just thought which would be your favorite brand. Of course, like everyone else, I would claim Apple. Yeah. Because it's a technology company that is positioned as a design company, and whatever they do is just sublime. I don't know what company would need an overhaul. Because brands with time also grow incrementally. When somebody tells me, hey, could you reposition us? Hey, could you rebrand us? I worry, because I'm like, what were you doing for the last 10 years? It's a crisis if you suddenly think you need an overhaul, because that shouldn't be the case. You should have been moving with the times, so to speak, you know? I would, of course, love to pick any of the many Pakistani brands, that's my mission, and sort of not bring them up to date, because obviously they're up to date on the back end, but just sort of bring them in tune with a more international visual vocabulary, which is sort of our strength at Hamidi, and give them something to really enjoy and play with and compete with. I think we have enormous levels of potential to offer. Just look at the startup culture and the kind of accolades they're winning left, right, and center, and the kind of seed money that's coming their way. These are the brands that are going to take us into the future, and certainly internationally. They need to be top-notch in the way they look and feel. But the startup culture comes to me and say, hey, can you give us startup prices? I don't understand that. You've got $1 million in the bank. Our costs are nothing compared to what you need to go out and do, you know? So branding needs to be taken seriously. It is the future. Branding is how people will perceive you. Branding is the ins and outs of your organizational belief system, your value system. It's everything, if you think about it. And to take it lightly is to take yourself lightly. So once that understanding is there, I think all of us collectively in the business need to move in a slightly more signature, slightly more single-minded way into the sunrise.
Yeah. And we're almost towards the end of 2021. So on a personal level, any plans for the upcoming year?
Yeah, I'm looking into setting office in Dubai. I'm looking into setting office in London, and sort of hopping back and forth, from Pakistan to both these cities. So it'll be an exciting time. It'll be an exciting time to see how that pans out.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This was worth the wait. and I hope you had a good time as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. I really enjoyed myself.
Thank you, Faraz.
All right.
We spoke about branding. We spoke about the need to take your branding seriously. We spoke about the constraints and how creativity fosters and develops in times when there is more censorship. Until next time, keep watching.